Okay. Where'd it go? There it is. All right. Hey, well, welcome everybody to this author event with award-winning authors Bill Markley and Kellen Cutsforth. We are happy to have you here. If you can mute, we're getting some feedback, so if you can mute, that would be great for now. I am Krista Sukup, and I am coming from Brainerd, Minnesota, and I have the Blue Cottage Agency. So I get to work with these fine authors, and just so happy to have them together to discuss this great book by Two Dot. I will tell you that I'm going to read just a little bit about what this book is. In Standoff at High Noon, it's published by Two Dot. It came out just this month, October 2021. It's the sequel to the Old West Showdown. And once again, these two authors investigate 10 well-known controversial stories from the Old West. Their opposing viewpoints. This book, you will learn more about the notorious figures and infamous events, including the controversial death of Davy Crockett at the Alamo, the life and death of Sacagawea, and who assisted Lewis and Clark on their Corpse of Discovery expedition, the tragic fate of the Donner Party snowbound in the Sierra Nevada, the assassination of Wild Bill Hickok, Arizona's Lost Dutchman Mine, and the controversy over Butch Cassidy's death in South America. This is the topics of this book. No matter whose side you're on, there's always something new to discover about the mythic Old West. So with that, I am going to stop share screen and get into the discussion with Bill and Kellen. And welcome everybody. It's great to see familiar faces. Great to see everybody. It's been a long time since we've all been together in person. So it's good to be here. So I'm going to start out first with asking Bill and Kellen, what prompted you? How did this book come about in the first place? Like, were you guys talking over a beer at a Western Rise of America and arguing over different stories? Or did the publisher come to you and say, we want this? Or how did this even come to be, this book and the book before it?
Well, how about
Bill, I think you got the best story on this, so I'll let you fire it off.
Oh yeah, you can introduce yourselves too. Introduce yourselves.
Sure. So yes, I'm Bill Markley, one of the authors, and Kellen, go ahead, introduce yourself.
I'm Kellen Cutsforth. I'm the other author, and I'm always right, and Bill's always wrong.
But notice who's wearing the black hat. Anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about how this came about. Kellen and I, we both belong to what's called an author posse, and we travel around different places and give presentations in our talks. And Chris Entz, the president of Western Writers of America, is the one who really put this posse together. And so, years ago, Chris and my wife Liz and I were driving across Nebraska for hours and hours and hours on end, and we talked about various topics. And Chris and I started talking about Cattle Kate, who was the first woman hanged in Wyoming. And Chris said she was hanged because she was accepting stolen cattle from rustlers, and the cattleman hung her. And I said, hanged her. And I said, no, that was wrong. The big cattlemen wanted access to her water, and they wanted her out of the way, so that's why they hanged her. So we went back and forth, and at one moment, the light bulb went on over top of our heads. We said, hey, wouldn't this be a great idea for a book? We'd throw, each take controversial stories from the Old West, one tell one side and the other tell the other. Well, Chris wasn't able to do it, and Kellen stepped up to the plate and hit a home run, I believe. And so we pitched the idea to Two Dot. They thought it was a great idea, and so we came out with our first book, Standoff. Sorry, I get confused sometimes, getting old. Showdown, Old West Showdown. This was our first book, and we went through 10 Old West controversial stories, and Two Dot thought it was going so well that they asked us to put together a second, and we came up with 10 more controversial stories, which is the book we're talking about tonight. This one, Standoff at High Noon. And Kellen and I, as you mentioned, we've already come up with 10 new controversial stories that we'll see if how well this book sells, and if Two Dot will want us to do another one. So Kellen, go ahead and add to that.
I think you covered it all just about as well as you could, man. Yeah, we Chris wasn't able to do it because she had a full plate, and so Bill came to me and we started talking, and I said, yeah, let's do this. Let's fire it up, and we can argue just about as good as anybody. So and it's a really novel concept. You know, it's sort of, you know, so many things have been done, but like anything, you take a new look at it, and the concept of two authors, and so one taking a controversial topic, and then the other one, and you hash it out in the chapters, so the people reading it can see, you know, what are the both sides, instead of one person just pushing their agenda. You get both sides, and you get both sides of the story, both sides of the coin. So yeah, I loved it right away. I mean, it's a great idea, and I think we did a bang up job with it.
I think, just to add to what Kellen said, one of the things we've done with both books is almost every paragraph has an end note to it, and we have bibliographies in there so that people can check our sources if they want to learn more about the topics. You know, go look at the sources and come up with their own opinions. Who's right or who's wrong. I'm sure they'll side with me as we go along,
but well, you can lie as well as anybody, I suppose.
Thank you. Yeah, we should have had a couple of beers. We should be drinking beer too as we do this.
Yeah.
Right.
Because we've been known to argue at the conferences from time to time.
For sure.
In a good way. I mean,
For
not
sure. Yeah, always good nature.
Yes. Yeah. So there, that's how it came about.
You know, there's some people on here that are authors themselves, and I see some fiction writers out there. And I know for me as a reader, I get my entertainment from the fiction writers, and I love the research that they do. And a lot of times we use the sources from the nonfiction writers, such as you guys, for their sources. I am just wondering, like, why is, I'm not a researcher, I'm just a reader. Why are there controversies and not, where are the sources, and why is there controversy with not really understanding the facts? Like, where do you get your information from, and how, you know, where is that coming from?
Why don't you start?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, so a lot of the controversies build up over time because in the Old West and in certain time periods, you know, not everything is documented. So a lot of things come from stories. A lot of things come from tales that people have tried to build up, and sometimes people have outside motivations, and then other times something that people have believed as a fact for years and years and years, then all of a sudden a new piece of information is found, whether it's in an archive, whether it's in a personal collection, whether it's in you know, something that someone has purchased, and finds papers or more information on a certain subject, then the controversy arises. Then history is challenged, or what is believed to be fact is challenged. And that's really kind of how many of these came around, is that you know, for the longest time, you know, people thought, just to take the first chapter, people thought Davy Crockett died fighting at the Alamo, and then many years later, information has come around, said, well, no, he was actually captured at the Alamo and then executed. He didn't die fighting in hand-to-hand combat at the Alamo. And so and it was many years later in fact, a century later, when that information was discovered. But then that information has been challenged, so there's all these controversies back and forth, and there's many great historians who cite, several sources, primary resources, and have written about it that tell you, this is, they take their end, and then other people trying to prove the other side take their end, and there's many resources on the other side that disprove one way or the other. But what do you think, Bill?
Well, interesting that you brought up Davy Crockett, the analogy. Fake news is nothing new, because there was a lot of fake news back in the day over his death, and yeah, he did go down swinging. But just to piggyback on that about how you've got to be really careful about sources. If you can find something that is a day-to-day journal, a diary that was written, hours, if not moments after the event happened, I mean, that's your best source of information, as opposed to maybe somebody that remembered an incident and they wrote about it 20 years after the fact. I mean, their memory is going to change. And you got to be you even have to be careful with newspapers at the time, because a lot of times newspapers would print stories from other papers, and if a paper got the facts wrong, it gets spread all over the country. Case in point, Wild Bill Hickok, early 1870s. Of course, he was killed in Deadwood in 1876, but in the early 1870s, there was a news story that made the rounds that a group of Texans had caught him in a bar and shot and killed him, I believe Dodge City. And it made national news. It was all over the place, and until Hickok, who was living in Springfield, Missouri at the time, sent a letter to one of the papers in Missouri and said, "I hate to tell you this, but I'm still alive, and no Texans can put me in the ground." Basically, is what he said. So, fake news is nothing new. It's been around for a long time. So you got to be really careful. If you can, you got to compare various accounts from a particular time, but still people get things differently. We could take everybody that's here tonight on this Zoom cast, and I bet you each person, if they sat down and wrote about it, would write about it differently, and they'd pick up on certain points here that other people wouldn't even pick up. So yeah, you just got to be careful with your sources. And unfortunately, everybody I want to question about these things, they're dead, and so you can't go back and say, well, what did you mean by this or that? So you got to go with what you think is the best.
Right.
I think one of the things too is historians oftentimes say, you check your sources, and if you have corroborating sources, then you can oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes that's a fact. If you find multiple sources from multiple different areas, say you find a newspaper article, you find a journal, and you find a letter, or you find a financial report or something like that, and they all echo the exact same thing, then you're on the right trail, which can be often hard to find all of that. But yeah, that's kind of how you got to check your resources, because Bill's right, man. Fake news was a big thing, definitely in the newspapers. Then trying to whip up sales. So you write something scandalous, or like say someone's dead. It's no different than the internet today, right? Where they make up somebody died, and then it gets out there, and then it gets repeated, and then you see it over and over again, and then they have to go and call Betty White and make sure that she's still alive, kind of thing. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Interesting. Like human nature just doesn't change. Like we're still the same. And wow, that is just fascinating. So segue into Davy Crockett then. So what is the word on that?
Go ahead, Kellen. Go ahead, and then I'll tear it apart.
So the story is, right? Battle of the Alamo, and I think this is one of the most well-known stories. It's ingrained, I think, in the American mind and in a popular culture, all throughout American history, right? They all went down fighting during the Battle of the Alamo, and every single one of the inhabitants was killed, which is not true. Actually, there were actually a couple of people spared, but many of the people who died at the Alamo, of course, Davy Crockett is one of the most well-known. And the story is that Davy Crockett died fighting all the way to the end, and he was, stuck in it until the very end, and went down swinging with his bare hands. And it took, several Mexican fighters to kill him. But the fact of the matter is, several years, over 100 years later, a diary was found by a soldier from the Mexican side named Francisco de la Peña, and he said he wrote in his journal about the attack on the Alamo, and many of his descriptions are corroborated by other historians. Many of his descriptions of the battle, the way the wall fell, the way that the Mexican soldiers were able to breach the walls and get into the Alamo, is corroborated by archival resources, primary resources, as well as viewing the site today. But one of the things that De La Peña mentioned in his diary was that Crockett was actually captured. He was not killed in hand-to-hand combat. He was captured. And under Santa Anna's rule, his rule said that any of the Texans that were captured were to be killed, were to be executed. None of them were to be allowed to survive. And when Davy Crockett was captured, he was run through with bayonets and executed instead of fighting, as the tale we've been told. And you can find corroboration of the other events that De La Peña mentions in his diary throughout history of the battle. So it gives good evidence that what he's talking about in the death of Davy Crockett is most likely true. Beat that, Bill.
False. So, like anything, there's problems with Kellen's story. The De La Peña, I'm not even going to call it a diary. It's more of a memoir. The real problem with it is when you look at the book itself. When you go in there, the pages that refer to the so-called execution. Oh, I see Bill Grunham is on here. Yay, he can back me up.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! I'm dead.
For those of you that don't know Mr. Grunham, he is an expert on this topic. And in fact, I cite him a lot in my defense of Crockett. So anyway, the De La Peña memoir, the pages that talk about Crockett's death are different pages than the rest of the book. They were inserted into that part of the book, and they were written in a different handwriting. So it leads one to be suspect about that version of Davy Crockett's death. Now, there are other people that were there at the time, and they had seen where Crockett's body was. There are several accounts of him going down. There's, on both sides, there are stories that appeared to have the ring of truth and other stories that appear not to have the ring of truth on both sides. So again, I don't think anybody should really hang their hat 100% on that particular journal. again, because different type of paper inserted into it and a different handwriting. So, but you can read all about that in our book.
Nice pitch.
All right. Awesome. Okay. So in chapter 2, Sacagawea, who I wonder if my mom's on because she loves learning about this, but where and when did she die?
Okay, I'll let Kellen start again on this
Oh,
because
what? No.
yours is the more traditional.
You get to go. You go, and then I'm gonna burn you down.
All right. Okay, so Sacagawea was, as most people know, she was put by the Lewis and Clark expedition along with her husband Charbonneau in what is now North Dakota along the Knife River there. They needed somebody to go with them further up the river. This is, about, well, they left in 1805. They left St. Louis area in 1804, but by 1805, they were up at the Knife River with the Mandans, and they picked up Charbonneau, and he had two wives that were Shoshone women. And he took one with him and he left the other one back at the camp, the village. And he took Sacagawea with him. And of course, we all know they went all the way out to the West Coast and back. And I think she had to be a marvelous woman. When you read the accounts, she helped them along the way. She wasn't as much as a guide as a person who assisted them along. I mean, what kind of foods to find and eat, how to survive in different conditions. And imagine at this time, she's crossing the continental United States with a newborn baby with her, all the way out and all the way back. So I think she was a marvelous person. When they got to Shoshone territory, they ran into their her fellow people there. In fact, they ran into her brother, who helped them along the way. So anyway, coming back, they came back with Lewis and Clark. They got to again to the Knife River communities there, and Charbonneau and Sacagawea stayed there. Clark had become infatuated with their family and said, "If you ever come down to St. Louis, and I'll take care of the son, little Pop." And so they did. They went down to St. Louis, and then after several years, they came back upriver. They get to what was the fort they got to, Kellen? And anyway, they're heading upriver to back up to what's now North Dakota, and Sacagawea was sickly. The one story goes that at this particular fort, she eventually dies, and that's it. That's the end of the story. Oh, it was Fort Manuel Lisa. Fort Manuel Lisa. And so the claim is that she died there, although there are others that say that it was not Sacagawea that died there, because they don't mention, they just say it in the diary, it says Charbonneau's wife. It doesn't say that it was Sacagawea. So there is a school of thought that it was the other wife that died at Fort Manuel Lisa. And Sacagawea came back to St. Louis with Charbonneau for a while. They went further out on the plains trading. He left him because he had, I guess, one too many wives at the time. And he eventually wound up with the Comanches, who are basically related to the Shoshones. They came from the same people that spoke basically the same language at the time. And she eventually made her way back to the Shoshones, where she lived out the rest of her days on the Wind River Reservation, and her grave is there today. And the people there on the Wind River Reservation believe that that is Sacagawea out there. So, okay, shoot me full of holes.
Fake news. Okay. So here's the thing. So Sacagawea, when they stopped at Fort Manuelisa, she was extremely ill, and that's correct. And in the report that was found, it said she died of a putrid fever in 1824, or I'm sorry, 1812. I think that's right. Is that right? 18.
Yeah, it's about that.
1812. Yes.
Yeah, because the
So,
War of 1812 is going on.
Right. So Charbonneau had two wives, and one of them was Sacagawea, and the other one we actually don't know her name. But the way this story starts is that a woman wrote a biography of Sacagawea at the early 20th century, and she said that Sacagawea, she's the one that came up with the story that Sacagawea lived on, that she lived to almost 100 years old and died with the Comanches. Now Charbonneau this is very interesting because the second wife, she's now known as Owl Woman. Well, that name comes from this biography. It's not written anywhere else in any other historical record, but in this biography of Sacagawea. Sacagawea died at the age of 24 from a fever. And not only was that reported in primary resources on the reservation where she died, but much later, Clark's sort of I'm not going to call it a journal. It's sort of notes on the expedition. He wrote the names of each person in these notes, and these are all been proven to be in his hand, in his writing, his materials, and he wrote the name Sacagawea. He spelled it. He was a terrible speller, but he spelled out her name phonetically, and next to it, and this was discovered. These were written in 1825. Next to it, he wrote dead. So he knew that she had died, and he was, as Bill said, obsessed with their family. He knew a lot about them. He took care of her young son. So he knew a lot about Sacagawea, knew where she was, and knew that she had died. And the story of her living on doesn't come around to the 20th century. And it's been repeated over and over and over and over again. But if you go back, if you look at the primary resources, you realize she passed away. She died in 1812 at the age of 24. And there are multiple resources. In fact, Clark himself, who was made famous from the expedition, even notes that she passed away.
Well, there is an alternate version to that. Again, you'll have to read the book, but there is a possibility that Clark was told, Charbonneau's wife died, and he assumed that it was Sacagawea. So that's what I'll say to that.
But also in the report of the death, they also note it was the wife that accompanied Charbonneau on the Corps of Discovery. They note that it was that wife, and Owl Woman was not with them. There was only one of his wives, and it was Sacagawea that was with him.
Interesting. So we have a couple questions. Deborah's wondering what happened to her infant. Did he survive to provide details of his mother?
Yes, he did. He did survive and flourished, and he was a trader. Traded, went out. In fact, he lived out there with the Shoshones for a while. So yeah.
It's also interesting. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
It's also interesting to note that Sacagawea and Owl Woman, for lack of a name to call the second wife, were actually kidnapped by the Hidatsa, a native tribe, and sold to Charbonneau. And then he took them as wives. So they were kidnapped and sold into slavery and then sold as wives to Charbonneau later on.
Yes, we can agree on that.
And right after I graduated from college, my first job was in Bismarck, North Dakota. And everybody there, I learned to pronounce it as Sacagawea. Why is that?
Right.
Okay.
I'm probably the one pronouncing it wrong, but I learned to pronounce it as Sacagawea. But you're probably pronouncing your pronouncing is probably more correct than mine.
There's several ways to pronounce it, and there's at least 3 ways to write it. So
that's
and-
interesting.
And Clark wrote every one of them wrong. I'll just say he was a horrible speller. Man.
Okay.
I like the way Clark spelled because, it was phonetically, and that's how I like to spell.
Right. Okay, so I'm not totally off there. I'm like, I learned from the people in North Dakota they had a lot of different things they said out there, and that's where I learned a horse apiece. They all say, "Oh, that's a horse apiece." So I learned lots of things out there. So what? North Dakota. So can you tell us, and if other people have questions, pipe in. One question came from somebody. If you are always defending your positions, or do people, if you're always having to defend your position, or sometimes do you just play devil's advocate?
We got to be honest here, or
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We've argued about who's going to take what positions.
You know what? If we're gonna pull the trigger and be honest, let's be honest. Sometimes Bill and I flip a coin.
Some of these positions are really hard to defend, but
some of these are extremely hard to defend. But we realize that it stirs the pot, and that's what people like. They like the controversy, and it doesn't matter how old it is. People love that. They eat it up, right? Because it's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun. And so sometimes, yeah, begrudgingly, there's a lot of teeth gnashing, and sometimes it's like, oh, okay, I'll take that, but you have to take the other one then on the other. Now, but
now the teeth comes out. But it's interesting because it's just interesting that
truthfully, there are some times where we split, where we honestly, absolutely split and go separate ways.
And when you start researching things, you find stuff that you're going, wow, okay, this alternate position that I didn't want to take has some merit to it. So that happens at times. Or, as for instance, in our first book, we did, Buffalo Bill, and, did he ride for the Pony Express? And did he do this and that? And we both love Buffalo Bill. So I got the task of debunking everything. And that wasn't as much fun as Kellen's side, but I still did it. did my duty.
Can you tell us what? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and I'll admit that on the Billy the Kid one, I had to take that he survived.
You what?
I had to take the side that he actually survived and wasn't killed by Pat Gear.
Yeah, that was bad. just like I don't know. Somehow you wound up with Jesse James that he lived on. Maybe you want to tell that story.
No. Krista has something else. She had something else to ask. Let's go that way.
I was gonna say, what is the most unusual story you've come across?
Oh man, for me, it's the Lost Dutchman Mine. Man alive, there are like 50,000 different stories about, oh, it's here. Oh, it really wasn't a mine. It was treasure, and it was buried in the mountain. It was never a mine. And then, oh, it was these Spanish that had it first. It wasn't this old German that found it. I mean, there's these ridiculous stories. and that someone pulled it out, and then some gangsters caught up with him and shot him down. You know, I mean, it's all this crazy stuff that you cannot corroborate. And there are a million stories out there about this stuff. Yet no coin, not one bit of gold, not a flex has ever been pulled out of the mountain, ever. But there's all these crazy stories. People getting killed, people going up there getting lost, and all. I mean, that was easily one of the most crazy, wild ones that I did. I don't know about you, Bill, but that was for me.
I guess you can tell which side Kellen told on that story. I just again, you'll have to read our book, but I'll just say one thing. No, I did the side of the story that there is something out there, but I just want to leave everybody with this one fact. If somebody's trying to sell you a map to the mine, don't buy it, because if it is a real map to the mine, then why aren't they out there getting it? So I'll just leave it with that.
What's the most far from the truth thing you discovered? Well, besides that, is there another one besides that, or would that have been it? Or is there another
say, Bill?
Well, I would say that Jesse James lived on. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, and Kellen had to take the side of the story. I mean, that he lived on, and so I had the side is no, the Fords, shot him in St. Joe, and that was it.
Yeah, the living on stories. No one wants their folk hero to die. No one wants their, we want them to live forever, and so and when it's the old Liberty balance. When the fact becomes legend, print the legend, it's people want it to live on forever, always be there, and so there's some far-fetched stuff out there. Duplicate guys, the whole thing. It's something else.
Yeah, Jesse James' son said he knew of at least 20 Jesse James imposters out there. And at one time, one of the most popular Jesse James imposters was traveling around with the Billy the Kid Jesse James, or Billy the Kid imposter, and the two would go to various county fairs and that sort of thing, and sell their wares. So yeah. Kellen had to do Billy the Kid lived on too.
Yeah,
They probably owe him a couple.
Yeah. I always get stuck. I always get stuck. But like I say, there are ones that we disagree with. I mean, in the first book, Bill's definitely dead set against the herbs. In this one, he's pretty dead set on Sacagawea and the Lost Dutchman Mine. We split. We actually had knockdown dragouts on some of that stuff, and it's like, man, Bill, you sound like the biggest liar in the world, man. Come on. What is this?
I think one of the things that we both can agree upon, that we've talked about this before, was our chapter on Tom Horn, the stock detective out in Wyoming. Yeah. Did he really murder Willie Nichols, or did somebody else do it? And we both went through the trial transcripts and everything else like that. And it was a huge case around the turn of the century. And I mean, there were reporters from New York City coming out, to cover the trial. And people were divided at the time. And I could see where, there'd be the supporters and those against it, even at that time. In fact, when, and for those of you that don't know, and I don't think I destroy the story here, but he was convicted of murder and to be hanged. And there were people that were trying to break him out of jail. And the day of the hanging, they even had a machine gun set up to ensure that no one would try to come in and rescuing. So I think that, I don't know if you agree with that or not. That was a
Yeah,
pretty cool story.
that is one of the best, and that one was actually when we split, and it was a slobber knocker. We definitely went back and forth on it because it's just it can go either way. It's one of those really good stories that when you read it and you find out the facts of the case, it can go either way because Tom Horn had a reputation as being a cutthroat, being a hardliner, and have actually got into fights and killed people that he said were rustlers, and so you have this reputation following the man. But yeah, that one was good, and I agree with Bill. I think that's one of our favorite chapters, just personally between he and I. Not because it was a good fight, which I love, but that it was really just a really interesting story. But Tom Horn became popular and is known today really because Steve McQueen portrayed him in the film version of the story of Tom Horn. So, which is also another great movie if you've ever watched it.
Somebody had a question back on the topic of the Dutchman story. Do you think Weaver's Needle actually plays a big part of where the gold might supposedly be found?
No, man, no.
Wait a minute, you're the guy who doesn't believe any of it. So it's
the same as the Peralta stones. It's the same as I have a map and it was handed down here. And if we can just find the map, it's the same thing. How many people? There are thousands of people who have wandered into the Superstition Mountains and come out with nothing. And some of those people have wandered in there and lost their lives looking for that treasure. And no. No, go ahead, Bill. No.
Thank you. I'm not sure how much Weaver's Needle plays a part of it, but I think everybody, and especially people that are in that area, know just right to the north of the Superstition Mountains, it was a gold mining district, and that district came about just several years after the Dutchman had gone out into that area. So my own personal theory is that the Dutchman went into where that gold mining district is now today, and that's where he came up with his ore from in there. That's my I think that's probably how it happened. And he went out towards the Superstition Mountains and tried to lead people on a wild goose chase, because really he did not have a claim, and he didn't want anybody to come in and learn where his gold was. Just one point on the map too. The map was created by two people that were taking care of him as he was dying. And the night that he died, and he was trying to tell him where his mine was, they were both drinking, and the woman got some of the coordinates on the map wrong. So never buy a map to the Lost Dutchman Mine.
But if you hang out after this, Bill will sell you a version of one, so you can just.
Yes, I will.
Gosh, never buy them. Oh, that's funny. And if you have questions on any of these topics, let us know. But I want to make sure before we run out of time that we do talk about the Donner Party. And I recently read a really great book on it, and I'm curious to know what you guys have to say about the controversy of that.
So the controversy has arisen in recent years when archaeological digs have been done, and some of the graves have been dug up, and they said that there's no indication of some of the bones having been gnawed on. And the controversy has arisen that said, well, because of our archaeological findings, we actually believe that there wasn't any cannibalism. amongst the Donners and the Donner Party, which encompasses many, many, many people, not just Donners. But that is a total fabrication. There are firsthand accounts. There are archaeological findings of some finger bones and things like that in the actual fireplaces that were used at the camp. And there are multiple firsthand accounts of people saying, and shamefully saying, yes, I partook of human flesh to survive because we were going to die. And when one of our members passed, yes, we ate them, we consumed them. And what's also interesting is actually a lot of the flesh that was consumed by the children in the park to keep them alive, to keep them sustained, because they weren't as hardy, of course, as the adults. And so the flesh was cooked and fed to them. And those are not only reports in the newspapers, but in personal accounts and recollections, but almost firsthand, immediate, as what Bill was talking about, sort of a journal written directly, immediately after the event, when memories are fresh, and when events are fresh in people's minds. Those were written and talk about the cannibalism and the admittance of the consumption of human flesh.
So, this was one of those stories where, okay, Kellen got Jesse James lived one, and I got that there was no cannibalism at the Donner Party. Well, so I will admit that there was some, but not as prevalent as people believe.
I win.
No, it's gonna be. But it wasn't as prevalent as people believe. That there were a lot of people in the Donner Party that never did consume human flesh. The newspapers at the time were very salacious. People loved like gothic tales of bodies being cut to pieces and stuff. And so the newspapers just had a field day nationally with the whole Donner Party thing. But as Kellen said, out of necessity, there were some bodies of people that had died that were used to feed people, and almost half the people of the Donner Party were children, and you didn't want to see your kids die. But there were two main camps there in the past, and the one camp was the lake camp, where there probably was some cannibalism going on, and then the actual Donner camp itself. And there's been no evidence found of any cannibalism at that particular Donner camp, except for one guy who went back down there afterwards and carved up a couple of bodies to a guy named Kesselberg or something like that. But there was a lot of there were those that did it, but it wasn't as prevalent as the news media at the time made it out to be.
Well, and what I think it's real interesting to mention here too, is that for those who aren't as familiar with the story of the Donners and the whole Donner Party, and Bill's right, there were two camps, Truckee Lake and then the Donner camp, and Truckee Lake was eventually renamed Donner Lake. So if you go there now, that's what you'll find. But what's really interesting to note is people knew the story had gotten out because some people had escaped from the camp and gotten out of the mountain, and the story had gotten out. So people knew that the Donners were trapped there. They knew that the party was trapped there. And so this already started circulating as really hot national news before the people had even gotten out of where they were trapped. So stories of cannibalism and things like that, as Bill said, and I will agree with that, were built up before even any of the actual information had started coming out of the camps. But a lot of the journalists at the time took, they said, well, they're out of oxen, There's nothing to eat up there. The snow is heavy. They must, it must be cannibalism. And then when some of the stories started coming out, they ran with it, right? But it's an amazing story because they knew they were stuck there, and they actually sent rescue parties up there, and some couldn't get to them, some did, and they got some of the children out, but other people were left behind because they were sickly. They couldn't get them out for whatever reason. And so all of this was happening while people were still trapped at the different camps, which is really crazy. It's like live updates almost of what's going on with these people trapped. So some people think, well, then the story came out when they finally got out and the winter ended and they were finally able to get down, but it was going on as events were happening.
What's really a shame is at the Donner camp, there's not as much information as to what went on at the Donner camp as at the Truckee Lake camp. And Tams and Donner kept a journal during that time period, and unfortunately, it was lost. So nobody, wouldn't it be great to know what she had written down about what had happened in that camp? But unfortunately, they didn't find it at the time. When they did get into the camps, it was already gone for one reason or another. We have time. One of the stories that Kellen and I really disagree on, which I believe is true, is that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid did not die in Bolivia the way that you can see in the movies with Paul Newman and Robert Redford. It did not happen that way.
Here's the one that he takes.
I'll just end. They did wind up in France, the south of France, and the Pinkertons were still after them, and they escaped from there. And who knows where in the world they wound up, but they were last seen years later in the south of France. So go ahead.
And they were also seen in the United States, and they were also seen in Mexico, and they were also seen, I mean, come on, I mean.
It's like Elvis. It's like Elvis.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And a million Elvis fans can't be wrong, right? It's the same thing, we still see it today.
The Pinkertons can't be wrong. They were still gone after him after that Bolivian incident. They're still tracking them down.
Well, the Pinkertons are always known for just being such experts at what they did. They were never wrong, of course. But the thing is, and this is what we just covered, right? We want our heroes to live on, and we're Americans. Our heroes are outlaws and gangsters, man. Those are our guys, and we want them to live on. We want them to always be there. And so we get sucked into the romanticism of they lived on, Butch is still there. He lived out his days in Bolivia as a, hard, grizzled guy who made it, and that's what we want to hear. But the problem is the facts point to the opposite. The two men died, and it wasn't the shootout that you see in, I think they were surrounded by 3 or 4 guys. But they were pinned down, and the sad thing is Sundance was hurt, and it was a mortal wound, and he was going to die, and so Butch did him in, and then Butch did himself, and that's the way it went down. And it's not as romantic as living on into the south of France, is it? But it's a fact, and it's what's true.
But sometimes the romantic can be true, because neither of those guys were ever identified as Butch and Sundance. They, to this day, if you look it up, they are two unknown characters. And some people believe that the one guy was from Chile. So, just to tell the other side of the story.
When you were a kid and you did connect the dots, right? You didn't know what the picture was going to be, but you could probably pretty well tell if you just connected the dots, right? You'd get it,
Yeah. Your dots are not connecting, but anyway. Anyway, does that, looks like we're running out of time here. Does anybody have any burning questions they want to ask us?
Yes, please. We want to hear your comments or questions.
You can tell Billy's wrong. He can handle it.
I'll do a plug real quick. Our book, you can buy it, order it in your local bookstore or buy it at any of the internet things, but you should try to help the local bookstores if you can.
Definitely. They need the love.
Yeah.
Wow, no questions.
No questions. Okay. Got some thumbs up and some people that are responding that they're really enjoying this. Did they ever do any forensics? Like go back, I mean, investigative, like real forensics on
Yes,
some of this?
that's a wonderful question. Yes, they have. And Bill, can you tell them when they dug up what was supposed to be Jesse James' grave, that it came back inconclusive?
No, it
So
came back. It was, what'd the guy say? It was like 99% sure that it was Jesse James.
no,
Yes,
but then
yes.
then they had to do a retraction and
No,
say, well, you know, we the DNA that they used was not as well supported, and so on and so forth.
no.
And then you can do like 23andMe, and people are like somebody in our class or somebody of my twins were studying this stuff in social studies. They had a test today, and they said, oh yeah, our friend is related to Daniel Boone.
Oh my God.
Like, so it's like, oh, and then my neighbor says her husband's related to Jesse James. So it's like, well, really? How do we know that? Because they, there's no DNA contact tracing on these people. I don't know.
Well, and here's another one, forensics, right? Let's look at the Lost Dutchman Mine and the Superstition Mountains. The mountains that they have done analysis, geological analysis on it, that it's igneous rock and that gold could not be produced in the mountain because of the rock that it is. So, there's that. They have done that. There's wonderful
yes,
archaeological.
right to the north is that.
Say it again.
Right to the north is that official gold mining district, and I believe that's where right to the north of the Superstition.
Okay.
That's where.
So not the Superstition Mountain.
It's part of the it's to the north. It's like, it's right there. Okay, back to Jesse James real quick. This is what Professor James Starr said, who led the forensic team. And he said at this American Academy of Forensic Scientists in Nashville, Tennessee, he said, I feel a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that we have the remains of Jesse James. There you go. That's his quote.
He lied.
Interesting. It's fascinating to me how similar our generations are in human nature. And you would think that nowadays we have so much more information that we would get to the truths, but it just, not everything's black and white, and there's a lot of gray area and a lot of things emotionally we want to happen and facts don't cover it. And this has just been a great conversation about this book. And if you guys want to read more about it, go to your local bookstore. We always, like we said, want to support them. And thank you, Kellen and Bill, so much for spending some time with us this evening. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Krista. Thanks for doing this, putting this on.
Yes,
and
thank you.
And thanks everybody for joining in tonight. And we'll post this video on their Facebook pages. So we can, if people have missed it or you want to rewatch it, you can do that. So with that, I will say good night to everybody. And I wish you all well and hope to see you at another event.
Thank you.